Askreddit.
What's the worst case of rich kid syndrome you've seen? In high school, a kid was bragging that he got in his third fender bender in his old car, 3 years old, that his parents gave him but he hated, so his parents were buying him an entirely new, current year, car to incentivize him to drive better. Dunno if it qualifies as rich kid syndrome, but when I got out of the Navy I decided to use my GI Bill at one of the Penn State satellites. I was sitting in the cafeteria drinking coffee and typing up a paper when a girl sits down across from me and opens her backpack. She pulls out a sandwich bag and looks at it in disgust, then looks me dead in the eye and says, "I don't even know why I bother, my mother never cuts off the crust." I let out one of those high-pitched short laughs like, is this girl for real? Oblivious to the tone of it, she says, "I know, right," then asks me if I want it. I looked around thinking I was getting pranked or something, cause this shit is too stereotypical to be real, and I just assumed I was being filmed. She shook it at me and gave me a well look. So I said fuck it and took the sandwich. She then pulled out her student ID card and bought a crap ton of French fries. That sandwich was awesome. I think the bread was homemade and it was stacked like a dagwood. It had all kinds of expensive looking meats and Dijon mustard. Serious gourmet shit. I know this girl's mother will never see this, but I just wanna say someone appreciated that sandwich. A 12-year-old family friend got an iPhone XS for his birthday, then deliberately shattered his iPhone 8. A guy looked at my $2,000 Beta car in college and commented that it must have been really cheap and guessed $15,000. Edit. For anyone curious, it was a Kia Rio 2005 with 120k miles on it. I worked at a Starbucks and we hired a new guy, who I was training. At one point, I had to show him how to clean the restrooms. I grab the bleach and hand him a pair of gloves and he looks at me in disgust and says, "We don't have a maid to clean the bathrooms?" He quit the next day, lol. Went to a destination wedding in Mexico resort. Rich kids rented a golf cart, tore through the streets and flipped the cart, injuring people and causing a huge commotion and traffic jam. A Mexican lady comes out and begins to scold them for their behavior. "You wouldn't act this way at home." Rich kid responds, "I promise you we do." It was the earnestness of his reply that got me. Edit. He really believed he was placating her with that response. There's gotta be a German word for something being funny because the other party is aloof to their own behavior. My brother works at a rehab center for the kids of wealthy parents. He's always got stories, but the one that sticks with me the most was a kid who was in trouble with the law and doing rehab before his court appearances. You know, to look like a better person and hopefully the judge would go easier on him. He was mopey one day and my brother asks him what's wrong. The kid starts talking about how tough the whole experience has been for him. How it's been so hard on his family that his parents had to sell his house to pay for his rehab. My brother felt sympathetic and says, "Damn, that sucks that your parents had to sell their house over this." To which the kid corrected him, "No, they kept their house. They had to sell mine." I knew a girl whose allowance was $90 a day. She got into trouble so they cut it to $90 a week. This kid back in high school was whining, I mean literally whimpering, that he had to wait something like 6 weeks for his custom-built BMW to come over from Germany. Went to HS with this insufferably spoiled kid. Family had a couch in their home's elevator, and classical European sculpture. This was in the US. Kid talked down to about the less fortunate on a regular basis. Once made fun of me for picking a coin up off the ground. A friend of mine inherited a lot of money, enough to buy a house, and he spent it on 2 cars. A Subaru completely modded to Ken Block's version of it and some BMW, both extremely expensive. We asked him a few months after why he didn't buy a house with it because he still lived with his parents. So he told us that he already owned a penthouse. He just didn't want to move yet. I could absolutely survive on my own. My parents just pay for my food and house, but I pay for everything else. If I got a job I could pay for my food and house too. Said at 18, in the middle of a discussion between 2 middle-class peers who were talking about saving money because they had to pay for their own college and living expenses. About 5 minutes prior to this conversation, both peers had ordered the cheap dinner options and declined a shopping trip later that night, while rich girl was talking non-stop about buying the best most expensive souvenirs for her friends. Once tried working a regular person retail job and quit within a couple weeks as it just wasn't right and I didn't like it. Reed had actual responsibilities for the first time. Moved cross country for an 8-month education course, where her parents pay food, rent, and school. They also gave her a debit card which replenishes up to $500 when it hits $50. She still posts Snapchats with captions of that broke person life over pictures of her getting Starbucks every day, and insists she could survive on her own. Constantly suggests the most expensive options for meals, activities, etc., and tax on things like we can just split the bill. I know you're saving but it's just amount at least $50. You'll be fine, right? Then gets upset when people can't afford to spend time with her, or when someone dares to suggest that she helps cover costs. I wouldn't say rich kid but definitely spoiled brat who thought he was rich. Befriended him in 5th grade over our interest in the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game. First time I hung out at his place I noticed just how littered with stuff his room was, some even unopened. I showed him some rare card that I had recently pulled from a pack. He got super jealous and angry that I wouldn't trade or sell it to him. He immediately got up and walked over to the family computer and booted up a site where you could buy cards and various other toys and such. Completely ignoring having me over, he's now on an online shopping spree adding stuff to the cart. After adding a few things he yells where's the credit card, and immediately his older sister comes running up the stairs to yell Kyle. Mom said no more buying stuff online and closes the website and shuts off the computer. Kyle then proceeds to have a crying tantrum on the floor and I'm just standing there over him in shock at what's happening and how he's acting. I slowly stopped hanging out with him until completely avoiding him as his temperament got worse. Kid wasn't even rich either, if I remember correctly. Both of his parents were cops. Babysat some rich kids. A couple gems where when we were watching a movie and she said someone was ugly because they were poor. Another was that they left their stove at the side of the road for hobos. Kid was about 11. Edit because people are commenting about the stove. I have no issues with things being set out at the side of the road and wouldn't hesitate to grab something and leave things out myself. It was the hobo thing that irked me. Went to school with a crazy rich kid. His parents divorced and each decided to buy his love. Mommy owned a real estate agency, so she got him a license and spoon-fed him enough sales for a 6-figure income. The dad then bought him a magazine. Yes, the dad bought a magazine for his 24-year-old cokehead son to run. Worked about as well as you'd imagine. So my best friend's wife teaches at a ritzy $40K per year private school. As in, $40,000 a year for elementary and middle school. I think the HS is like $50K plus. Well, she teaches 7th or 8th grade. I can't remember. And she said she always goes around the class after the summer break and asks them what they did over the summer, and she particularly remembers one kid complaining about how much his summer sucked because he was stuck on his parents' yacht all summer and they didn't even take it to anywhere cool, just Italy. One of my college classmates wrecked his Range Rover over winter break and came back in an Aston Martin. Young celebrity posts a pic of a house they just bought. That house isn't that nice. My cousin's house is way nicer. My cousins live in a mansion in Tampa, Florida. It always rocks their world when they visit my studio apartment in a Miami ghetto and use my 3 Mbps internet. Rich relatives doesn't mean you're rich too. My friend literally throws away his change because he hates holding coins. Doesn't matter if it's 99 cents, he'll throw it away. That shit adds up. In middle school we were asked to draw our homes for some assignment and hand it in at the end of class. A popular, extremely wealthy kid that sat behind me raised his hand and smugly asked the teacher for another sheet of paper because he couldn't draw it all on one page. His friends just snickered but I was cringing. Even at 12 I remember thinking it was such a snobby thing to say. The Nintendo DS just came out. It was like $150 and my family lived in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment and drove a 20-year-old car that was always breaking down. We ate those cheap bags of Walmart beans and rice for months at one point. I expressed The desire to own one after my friend said he had one and I got. Why can't your parents just buy you one? I don't get it. It's dirt cheap. He didn't want to be my friend after that anymore. Literally avoided me and made fun of me for the rest of the year behind my back. I'm still salty about it. Maybe not rich kid syndrome, but middle class kid syndrome. What about that Dallas kid who killed those others in a drunken car wreck? Then used the "I'm too rich for consequences" defense? I work at a country club and on the 4th of July, while I was working, a little girl asked why we were closing at 7 instead of staying open all night. I told her I wanted to get to do sparklers and fireworks with my family too. She thought about it, looked back at me and said but y'all aren't real people. I just had to laugh and inform her I was indeed real and all my coworkers weren't just the slaves of the country club. Wild, man.